Perfect. Well, welcome everyone to the CFE Support webinar series. My name is Debbie Bayless. This evening's webinar is on understanding the CFE. First of all, a big thank you to the CPA Western School of Business, CPA Ontario, and CPA Atlantic School of Business for their wonderful partnership that they have and the resources and time that they made sure was put aside so that you have access to this valuable information. I want to provide you with a few logistics information before we start. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. So again, please use the Q&A function, not the chat function. This webinar is approximately 75 minutes, and then I'm going to open the floor for any questions that you may have. But during the presentation, you can certainly use that Q&A function and my peers will answer your questions. They may keep some of them for the Q&A later on. If we run out of time and you have additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to your province or your region. I've enclosed their email addresses here. Now, I know two of the very common questions asked is where do I find the recordings? You find them in the same location as you found the information to register for these webinars. So that would be in D2L under either Introduction to Capstone 2 and CFE or Capstone 2 homepage. A lot of candidates also ask us if you'll have access to the slides. Unfortunately, you will not, but you do have access to the recording. So the benefit of a recording is you're able to start and stop and put together your own notes and the information that you find valuable. So let's get started. What our objective this evening is to make sure that you walk away with a clear understanding of how CFE is marked. I always think of things in the context or use the analogy of a game. In order to play the game well, you first must understand the rules. In this context, we're talking about what are the expectations when you write CFE. Once you understand the rules, the expectations, then you can put together a strategy to increase your chances of not only playing that game well, but winning. And in this context, winning means successfully passing CFE. So as a result, this evening, I want to talk about the CFE structure. I want to spend quite a bit of time on talking about the passing profile of a candidate. And I want to share the different recommended approaches for day 1 versus day 2 and day 3. And I'm always going to share with you some additional and valuable resources. So as you are aware, CFE consists of 3 days of exams. Day 1 is 4 hours, day 2 is 5 hours, and day 3 is 4 hours. Throughout those 3 days, you're being tested on your ability to demonstrate depth, so that's the level of detail required, and your ability to talk about and explain the implications from a qualitative perspective. What's the potential positive or negative impact to the company? And breadth. And that, when you look at qualitative, is being able to identify an appropriate number of qualitative factors based on the case facts provided to you, and an appropriate number of correct inputs when it comes to your quantitative analysis. And that is all based on the depth requirements, and the breadth requirements are all based on CPA's competency map. So day 1 is a very comprehensive case. It is the Capstone 1 case a few years later. So for those of you who are writing the first time, you're most likely going to be writing Viviana's case. If you're a repeat writer, you more likely have said that you wanted to write the Neptune case. What happens is that Capstone 1 case a few years later. They've implemented some of the strategic options and maybe some of the operational initiatives. Maybe they might have implemented something you weren't even aware of. But the senior management and the board of directors are now looking for you for additional advice. They tell you what they've done, and now they're looking for you for assistance when it comes to other strategic and operational initiatives. You most likely will assume the same role. So for both cases, you are a consultant. There definitely is some quantitative analysis, but the intent is that it's not overly complicated. The biggest focus is on your ability to provide business advice. It is critical that you are able to clearly demonstrate that you understand the internal and external environment in which that company operates and the objectives that they want to achieve. Hence, every single time you look at any of the requireds, you need to integrate appropriate information from your situational analysis. Day 2, it's a comprehensive case. It's the same case for everyone. Normally, the requirements or the assessment opportunities or the asks, you'll find that I use those terms interchangeably, are usually clearly defined. For day 2 in particular, you're going to be tested at a depth level when it comes to your specific role. The only time you have the ability to demonstrate depth in your role is day 2. The information is going to be organized by your role. There's going to be shared information for everyone, and there's shared common information for everyone, and then there's specific information for your role. Day 3 consists of multi-subject cases. So you could have anywhere between 3 to 4 cases, ranging between 45 minutes to a maximum of 90 minutes. You will be tested at the core level, and it will cover all 6 technical competency areas. So it will cover financial reporting, management accounting, strategy and governance, audit and assurance, tax and finance. The requireds, what you're being asked to analyze, tend to be less directive. Now, what that means is they don't always say, CPA, please advise. Based on the case facts, there might be a trigger that you need to discuss a particular issue. Let me provide you with an example. Say that the user says, we received a $100,000 signing bonus, and so we recorded it as revenue when we received it. Also in that case, though, it tells you that that covers a contract for a 3-year period. That's your trigger that is an important financial reporting issue, revenue recognition issue that you need to analyze. Those requireds may be more integrated. What that means is your analysis and recommendation of one assessment opportunity will impact your analysis and recommendation of another. So again, I want to provide you with a specific example. Say in the case you have some financial reporting issues and you're being asked to calculate materiality. Well, first, you must analyze those financial reporting issues. Provide the user with appropriate recommendations and make the appropriate adjustments before you calculate materiality. There definitely is a heavier focus on your technical analysis, but you are being tested at the core level. So in 2020, the Board of Examiners shared this fantastic document that outlined the profile for a passing candidate for day 2 and day 3. Please note that day 1, the passing profile is different. So day 1 is marked differently than the combination of day 2 and day 3. Over the next several slides, I'm going to spend a lot of time closely examining the passing profile of a candidate for day 2 and day 3. There are 4 different levels, and I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail because, again, these are the rules, and we want to make sure that you have appropriate strategies in place so that you increase your chances of passing CFE. So the first level is all about sufficiency, and it takes into consider every assessment opportunity that you achieve reaching competent or higher. And it assigns boards marks, point values for each of these. And I'm going to talk about that shortly. The next 2 levels, level 2 and level 3, are all about depth. Level 2 is about depth in either financial reporting or management accounting. So it looks at the number of competent responses against those particular technical competencies. Depth in your role is the number of competent responses in the role that you've chosen to write in day 2. Level 4 is all about breadth. So it's about ensuring that you're meeting minimum expectations around, and it counts reaching competent or higher against each of the 6 technical competencies. So I know I've talked about reaching competent and competent. Let's spend a moment to remind everybody what the CFE competency levels are. So if a candidate does not address a required, something you've been asked to do, then the assessment is NA, not addressed. If the candidate makes a superficial attempt and most likely does not meet the breadth or depth requirements, then that assessment would be nominal competency, NC. If the candidate meets one of the requirements, whether it's breadth or depth, the assessment would be reaching competent. A competent response will meet the depth requirements, so the level of detail and making sure from a qualitative perspective, you're always answering that question, so what? What's the potential negative or positive impact to the company? And meeting the breadth requirements, number of correct inputs in your quantitative analysis, and the number of appropriate qualitative factors. That's a competent response. Competent with distinction is exceeding those expectations. So I want to take a moment, and the Board of Examiners reflect. They said what the assessment opportunities are designed in a manner to ensure that and answer this question: what would a competent CPA do in these circumstances? It's what would a competent entry-level CPA do in these circumstances? So to attain a passing standing, candidates must address the issues in the simulations meaning cases, that are considered significant. So look at this chart. It is very clear that you must pass every level to pass CFE. If you fail one of the levels, you will fail day 2 and day 3. So let's look at and assign kind of hypothetical numbers to each of these levels. We're accountants. Let's use some numbers just for interpretation purposes only and give you an idea. Please note these numbers, they've been made up. They are not the actual numbers. as far as what you need to achieve to pass CFE. The only people who know that are the people who created the exam and the people who mark the exam. So let's say that for level one, there's a possibility of a total scoring of 100 points. So then, in order to pass level one, the Board of Examiners may determine that a candidate must achieve a minimum of 80 points to pass level one. And remember, that includes any of your assessment opportunities throughout day one, day two, and day three, where you're either reaching competent or higher. Now, I want to share with you, this is an interpretation of the scoring that the Board of Examiners use. And this is the interpretation that the Capstone 2 education team uses. But again, I have a very big disclaimer at the bottom. This is for illustration purposes only. The Board of Examiners report is the only and sole source of truth. The CPA Capstone 2 education team, they are separate from the CFE exam team. And so they never communicate how CFE is actually marked. But we do know some fundamental principles. We do know that if you achieve not addressed or nominal competency, when it comes to level one, no point values are given. We know that if you achieve a reaching competent, that the point value given is lower than if your assessment opportunity is rated as competent or competent with distinction. So the Capstone 2 education team assigns 1 point for reaching competent, and they assign 2 points if you achieve a competent or competent with distinction. So this shows you that there is a difference, and it is extremely important to achieve as many competent responses as you can, because this increases your chances of passing level one. Also, this points out that achieving a competent with distinction adds no extra point value. So do not spend the time preparing a response that exceeds the expectations. It's anti-productive, and it most likely will negatively impact your ability to complete all of the assessment opportunities. So level two, all about depth, and it's meeting that depth, which is the undisclosed number of competent responses when it comes to financial reporting or management accounting. So say maybe you need to achieve competent response 20 times, for example. Hypothetically, to pass level three, which is your role specific, let's just say maybe you need to achieve a competent response on your role, which is only those assessment opportunities on day two, 30 times. For level four, this is all about breadth across all of the 6 technical areas. So say possibly, again, hypothetically, you need to achieve reaching competent or higher at least 25 times collectively. But also, there's a minimum expectation for each of the technical competencies. So maybe you need to reaching competent or higher at least 5 times for each of the technical competencies. The fundamental principle that's important to take away from this information is you must reach the minimum expectations when it comes to each of the technical areas. So if there is an area you have a real adversity to, and you avoid as much as possible not completing those assessment opportunities, that could result in you not passing CFE. So what I did is I prepared this visual because I wanted everyone to see the power of achieving a competent response. So again, this is my interpretation based on the information that we have at hand. So we know if you're awarded, you don't address an assessment opportunity or you're awarded a nominal competency, we know that that is not going to have any impact or be considered in any of the levels. I'm going to use the 1 point for reaching competent and 2 points if you achieve a competent response. So if you achieve a reaching competent in any of the technical assessment opportunities, you would be awarded, again, hypothetically, 1 point for level one. And then, of course, you'd be awarded one item or one assessment opportunity towards your level four. If you achieve a competent in financial reporting, competent, we know that the scoring will be higher. So let's just say you're awarded 2 points. That also will have a positive impact on your level two. And it also goes towards meeting your level four requirements. The same principle applies when it comes to management accounting. So again, you're awarded more points when it comes to level one. You're also awarded and counted towards your requirements for level two and level four. And last but certainly not least, also the same principle applies for your role. Awarded more points under level one, counts towards your level three requirements, and also counts towards your level four. So this illustrates the power of a competent response. So when we say the goal is to complete all assessment opportunities to your best ability, this is the power of achieving competent responses for your assessment opportunities. So let's take some time now to talk about the different approaches for each of the days. So when it comes to your timing, CPA Canada recommends that you spend approximately 60 minutes reading the case, creating your situational analysis, and preparing your outline. Then to take 50 minutes and pause and reflect. And during that time, you're determining what types of quantitative tools you're going to need. You're determining the order for each of your requireds and allocating time. Then spend approximately 150 minutes writing your response. It is very important that you leave some time at the end to be able to go back and review and make sure that you've addressed everything that the senior management team has asked you to do. So day one, there's a very important piece that is only done in day one, and it's a situational analysis. In the upcoming webinar next week for day one, I'm going to go into a lot of detail about what should be included in your situational analysis, and I'm going to provide and create an effective and efficient outline, including a situational analysis. So make sure that you attend that webinar next week. So what is the situational analysis? Well, remember I said that they're testing you on your ability to clearly communicate that you understand the internal and external environment in which the company operates. So the situational analysis will include things like the company's mission, vision, values, and key success factors. And those are things that you should memorize from the Capstone 1 case. The reason we say this is they may change, but more often than not, only some of the wording changes. So it's important that you have quick access and you understand that information so that when you are looking at and analyzing the different options, they're top of mind. Some candidates struggle because they treat the situational analysis framework, or situational analysis for short, as a separate standalone document. No, those factors are critical and should be an extremely important component of your qualitative analysis of the strategic and operational issues. The good news is, say that there's an opportunity in the industry where there's a particular target market that is really growing. And there's two strategic options that could capitalize that. You could identify that as an opportunity in the industry that implementing this option would capitalize on. Make sure you discuss the so what. What's the potential positive impact to the company? If you discuss it for both strategic options, that factor would be counted twice. So you can use the same factor more than once. Again, lots more detail on that next week. So let's talk about the expectations from the Board of Examiners perspective. Again, highlighting those internal and external factors that would influence the company's business and have an effect on the decisions that they make. It's important to pay close attention to any of the significant changes that have taken place. So make sure that your situational analysis uses the most updated information based on the day one case. It's important to not only identify the company's objectives, and they could be different. What do they want to achieve? When you're analyzing each of the strategic and operational issues, it's important to discuss, would implementing that option help the company achieve its goals or hinder? You must discuss that. It's also important to recognize any predominant, significant, or overarching issues. And what those are issues that affect many of the decisions that the company makes. So be on the lookout for these, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time of going into greater detail in an upcoming slide. But let me tell you, next week, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on the significant issues. So let's talk about the design from the Board of Examiners perspective, the day one design. It allows you to demonstrate your high level professional skills, your ability to determine what is relevant and critical to strategic decision making, your ability to use professional judgment, and your ability to be able to think on your feet because you are going to be presented with new information. So remember, I talked about those overarching or significant issues that affect the entire business. So at the entity level, I'm going to give you some common examples. Sometimes in the case, they're definitely not clearly identified, but they may say things like, I'm not sure how we're going to be able to do all this. We're already so busy. That is your first trigger that management has limited time. And then maybe later on in the case, they might again say, we haven't really addressed this area of the business because we've been too busy. That is a weakness, and it's a significant weakness that will impact the decisions and the board's ability to successfully implement strategic and operational initiatives. So you need to consider that when you are analyzing from a qualitative perspective the different options. Is this going to require more management's time when they already have limited time? It's the same principle when you're providing your overall recommendations. All of the options might be very viable, but there's limited time. So based on that significant issue, what do you recommend that they implement first and why? So some common examples: poor communication, lack of long-range planning, supplier production constraints. Please be on the lookout for those. And if there are constraints, you must consider that every time you analyze a strategic option. And when you provide your overall recommendations, do not exceed the supply or production constraints. Going concern, limited cash to invest in the strategic options, or based on the case facts, they're going to have limited cash. Be on the lookout. Is there repayment of debt, repurchase of shares, reputational risk? Already given you that example of limited management expertise, not focusing on core business, lack of innovation, inability to reduce costs, which means it's difficult for them to compete on price without shrinking those profit margins, competitive advantages eroding, unrealistic timeline, and downturn in the economy. So those are all important factors, and they are normally significant threats in the external environment or significant weaknesses internal to the company. So strong performance, candidates who demonstrated a strong performance when it came to day one, they identified those overarching issues and they explained the impact. They displayed a greater depth of understanding and integration. So when they looked and performed their overall quantitative analysis, they not only simply stated that there was limited cash, they talked about the implications. Limited cash means that there's limited, it reduces the number of strategic and operational initiatives that they can implement. They identified and provided in-depth discussions of the most important decision factors. So when you're looking at your situational analysis and considering the different strategic options, very important decision factors are: does it capitalize on an opportunity in the industry? Does it capitalize on the company's strength? Does it mitigate a threat in the industry? Does it mitigate a weakness? Those are important decision factors. They provided a valuable quantitative analysis to support their recommendations. They prioritized their recommendations. So they explained why one recommendation should be pursued over the other, always considering the impact to the board's objectives and the overarching issues. Weak performance, candidates simply listed the case facts when it came to the SWOT. So they did not address the so what. What's the potential positive or negative impact? When they performed their overall analysis, again, they didn't talk about the implications. When they integrated information from the situational analysis, it was just generic or it was incorrect. And when they talked about if implementing that option was aligned with components of the company's mission, vision, or value, they failed to describe how that option was aligned. So again, next week, I'm going to talk about and provide examples of how to demonstrate alignment with components of the company's mission, vision, and values. How do you describe that? Making sure that you describe that how. From a quantitative perspective, their calculations were difficult to follow, or they used an inappropriate tool. When it came to their conclusion and overall recommendation, they didn't take a step back and consider those overarching issues. So instead, they ended up providing a recommendation that wasn't viable. might have exceeded the production capacity, might have exceeded the maximum capital that they had, or it wasn't realistic because management had limited time. When it comes to your approach for day 2, it's very different. So day 2, as we said, is a comprehensive case, and in length, it could be 50 to 60 pages long. So needless to say, at first glance, that it can be quite overwhelming. Not all that information is for you. It's not all applicable for you. So remember that you're given some background information, both in narrative form and in appendices for all roles. And then you're given specific information for your role, both narrative and appendices. Only look at the information that is for everyone, so the common background information and the information for your role. Do not spend any time looking at what the other roles need to do. From a timing perspective, CPA Canada recommends that you spend approximately 75 minutes reading, creating your outline, and planning. Again, spend that 15 minutes for pause and reflection. During that time, you're determining the appropriate quantitative tools to use, ordering your requires, and then allocating time to each of those requires. So then you're going to spend approximately 195 minutes writing your response, always leaving that 15 minutes at the end to quickly go through and make sure that you've addressed everything that you've been asked to do. So what are some key success factors when it comes to day 2? It's critical that you know your role well. You are going to be tested at the elective proficiency level. So in other words, at the core level, you may only be required to demonstrate proficiency level B, but in your role, you might be required to exhibit proficiency level A. So your role is critical. Know how your role integrates with the core competencies when it comes to financial reporting and management accounting. So for those of you who attended last weekend the Capstone 2 module workshop, we did an activity that identified a lot of different quantitative functions that you would do that are closely linked to your role. Remember I said the common information, whether it's a narrative or in the appendices, are given to everyone. You need to be able to go through that information and extract only what you need for the requireds. Because in the common information, there may be information there you don't need. That being said, when it comes to the narrative and your appendices for your role, if you're given an appendix for your role, you better use it. There's a reason you're given that information. So let's look at some comments from recent Board of Examiners reports when it comes to management accounting and financial reporting. From a quantitative perspective, for management accounting assessment opportunities, strong candidates incorporated case facts. They chose the appropriate quantitative tool and they made the appropriate adjustments. When I look at these comments, a few things come to mind. Incorporated case facts. That means that they created an efficient and effective outline that extracted all of the relevant case facts. If you find that you're challenged determining the appropriate quantitative tool, please make sure that you attend the time management webinar because I'm going to spend some time going through the various quantitative tools, the type of information that's provided, and when you would use that tool. We candidates spent a disproportional amount of time on their quantitative analysis, which negatively impacted their ability to achieve a competent when it came to their qualitative analysis. They didn't integrate the appropriate case facts, or they applied the information incorrectly. And more often than not, they used an inappropriate quantitative tool. From a qualitative perspective for management accounting assessment opportunities, strong candidates always, they explain the implications. They talked about, they answered that question, so what, and tied the why and the impact back to the impact to the company. When they talked about the risks or the cons, they focused on items that directly impacted the company's bottom line. When it came to breadth, they made sure that they integrated appropriate case facts in their qualitative discussion. Unfortunately, what happened when it comes to weak candidates, on the other hand, is again, they simply stated the case facts. They relisted the case facts. Sometimes they only conducted a one-sided discussion. So in other words, they only talked about benefits or the risks. As CPAs, we need to have an objective discussion, which means we need to talk about the advantages and the disadvantages. They used a strategy, a very unsuccessful strategy, where they were going to include as many case facts as they could. So they were going with as much volume as possible over quality. Again, you will never achieve a competent response if you simply restate the case that facts that are provided. Now, I know candidates have said to me, but Debbie, the why and the impact is obvious. It could be argued that it isn't as obvious as you think. But let's just take a moment. Nobody can give you credit for something that's in your mind. The marker is only able to give you credit for what you put on the page. Another area of development was weak candidates didn't meet the breadth requirement. So the number of appropriate factors identified based on the case facts. Again, please be very, very apprehensive when anyone who's written CFE in the past tells you, oh, you need to, in order to achieve a competent, you only need to address and provide and identify these many qualitative factors. Nobody knows. The only people who know are the people who created the exam and the marking guides and the markers. So the fundamental principle is the more qualitative factors they give you in the exam, the more that you should discuss when you perform your qualitative analysis. How do you determine that? What you do is when you're allocating the time, you include as much in your discussion as you can, and then you need to move on. So financial reporting assessment opportunities. So strong candidates, they use the appropriate framework, whether it's ASPE or IFRS. When it came to revenue recognition and inventory, they identified that there may be more than one revenue recognition issue. Again, I'll give you a specific example. Say that the user has recorded the signing bonus for that contract as revenue when received. Plus, the user has also said that they've shipped out product that has a 3-month return policy and they've recorded the revenue. Those are two separate revenue recognition issues. They need to be analyzed individually. When it came to their analysis, Strong candidates, they applied the relevant case facts and they provided a recommendation that was consistent with their analysis. On the other hand, weak candidates, they tended to state the issue, they identified the issue, and then they provided their recommendation. There was limited analysis, and there was no clear rationale to demonstrate how they arrived at their recommendation. You cannot achieve a competent response even if your recommendation is correct. But if the marker, the user cannot follow your analysis, how you arrived there, it is not a competent response. When it comes to day 3, so we know that you're going to have 3 to 4 cases. So the time that you allocate to reading, planning, and creating your outline should range between 25 and 30% of your total time. Now I know because this is when candidates really feel the time crunch. And it's almost human nature that the first thing we think that we need to do is let's start writing our response. No, fight that need. Creating your outline is really important when it comes to day 3. You can create your outline either electronically or handwritten, but you should ensure that that information is logically organized. Now, the best practices that I'm going to show you, so next week during the day 1 webinar, I'm going to show you best practice in creating an efficient and effective outline for day 1. I'm going to show you, it's going to be an electronic outline in Word so that you can quickly turn it into response. The path to competent, I'm going to show you again that best practice on how to create an electronic outline we're going to create a partial one for day 2 in the path to competent. And for time management, I'm going to share best practice, again, creating electronic outline in Word for day 3 for time management. So let's look at the last 2 CFE exams. So there were 3 cases, and the time ranged anywhere from 70 minutes to 85 minutes. So your planning, your reading, outlining, and planning would range anywhere from 18 minutes to approximately 22 minutes. With the remaining time, so anywhere from 52 minutes to about 64 minutes of writing. The number of assessment opportunities that you would need to complete within that time ranged anywhere from 5 assessment opportunities to as many as 7. So you can certainly see outlining and time management is critical when it comes to day 3. So these resources that are available to you are the CFE Blueprint, the Board of Examiners reports, and for those of you who are not enrolled in Capstone 2, that's a great source of cases. And even if you're enrolled in Capstone 2, there's all kinds of additional cases that if you want to practice. So they have the cases, the marking guides, and they also have a passing candidate response. So I've spent an awful lot of time talking about the expectations when it comes to CFE, so the rules. Let's spend some time talking about what it means to be competent, because we know the ability to achieve as many competent responses as possible will increase your opportunity of successfully passing CFE. So as a result, I want to spend some time talking about the competencies and the different proficiency levels. I also want to provide you with an overview of the evaluation process when it comes to each of the days. so that you have confidence of the rigorous processes in place when they mark your responses. So, from an enabling competency perspective, there's 7 enabling skills that you really lend upon when you are writing your response to demonstrate your strong technical abilities. In particular, I'd like to highlight managing self. So we've talked about the importance of time management, of being able to add value, add appropriate advice to the user, solving problems and making decisions, and of course, effective communication. When it comes to your technical competencies, again, let's go through the 6 of them: financial reporting, strategy and governance, management accounting, audit and assurance, finance, and taxation. The goal of CPA is that you are being tested against the proficiency levels required for an entry-level CPA. So speaking of proficiency levels, let's spend some time talking about the different levels. So depending on the level, it clearly triggers the amount of effort and emphasis you need to place in order to achieve a competent response. Plus, it also serves as a very strong guide of where you should be spending most of your time as you prepare to write CFE. So there are 3 different levels, starting with the lowest level, proficiency level C. That is, you should spend very limited time in going through those particular tasks. Level C is all about your ability to explain and describe and demonstrate knowledge. Level B is to be able to do the requirements for level C, plus to be able to analyze the problem and draw logical conclusions for routine situations with low to moderate complexity. Level A is the highest level. When you are determining where you put your energy, it's important to start with those tasks, with those different skills, starting with proficiency level A, then B, then C. So what is proficiency level A? You have to meet the requirements for C and B, and also be able to demonstrate that you can analyze problems in sufficient depth, and that's routine and non-routine situations of moderate complexity. So I want to take a moment and just go through and read the 2 paragraphs, the last 2 paragraphs. So when it comes to routine, non-complex situations, you are expected to be able to perform at a higher level than if the situation is non-routine and complex. So the proficiency level is going to be higher. Generally, the highly complex, non-routine situations are not testable, and those items are identified in the Appendix A of CPA's competency map. So let's talk about the FAIR pass process. When it comes to creating and marking CFE, the Board of Examiners consider each of these components. They consider how they impact the overall results, how they impact the results for a particular assessment opportunity or a particular simulation, in other words, a particular case. I want to use and talk about the 3rd point. So they look at the level of difficulty for each assessment opportunity and each simulation. So again, if in order to achieve a competent response, They compare that and say, is that what the expectation is for an entry-level CPA? If their testing and the marking guide was created at a higher competency level than it is required for an entry-level CPA, they will mark your response at the entry level for a CPA. So let's talk about the marking guides and how they're put together. They are put together at least 6 to 12 months before CFE is actually published. And that information is shared with the various provinces and regions. And it is carefully reviewed by different stakeholders. So it could be reviewed by certain academics. It also could be reviewed by past CPA markers. So they review the cases and the marking guide, and they share any of the discrepancies that they may see. So this is all done before CFE is ever published. So let's talk about how many people were involved in marking September 2023 CFE. There were approximately 210 individuals that were chosen. The criteria for selecting these individuals who marked the exam was marking experience, motivation, academic achievement, work experience, personal references, and regional representation. So please be assured, these are very competent markers. Plus, the marking is supervised by CPA Canada Evaluation and International Assessment full-time board professional staff. So before CFE is ever marked, members of the CFE subcommittee, staff, the leaders, the assistant leaders, they participate in a 4 to 6 day preliminary testing time. So what happens is they review the marking guides, they randomly choose some candidates' responses, use the marking guides, determine if there are any discrepancies based on the feedback that they've been provided by the regions and the provinces. They make the appropriate changes all before an actual CFE exam is marked. So let's talk about the overall assessment for day one. So there are 4 outcomes. A candidate could be assessed as a clear pass, a clear fail, a marginal pass, or a marginal fail. So what that means is they use what they call a borderline model. So if a candidate's overall assessment is either a marginal fail or marginal pass, so everyone's response is marked at least once. But if the candidate's response falls into the marginal pass or marginal fail, it's marked again. That assessment is compared with the original assessment. If there is any difference, a third, a seasoned marker, assistant leader, or a leader marks that response again, and their overall assessment is the final determination. So when they are looking at a candidate's response, they also carefully consider these factors. Did the candidate step back and see the big picture and address the broader issues? Again, if there's significant issues, were they addressed? Were they discussed? Did they prioritize the issues? Did they perform both a quantitative and qualitative analysis to support their discussion and conclusion? Did they use the appropriate quantitative tools? Did they use sufficient case facts about the internal and external environment in their discussions? That's all about integrating the appropriate factors in your qualitative analysis of those strategic options? And did they communicate their ideas clearly? When it comes to day 2, the evaluation process is also a little different. So what happens is the common assessment opportunities, those are marked by different individuals than the individual who marks the role-specific assessment opportunities. Every paper is marked twice. And if those two assessments, if they are different, then that paper is marked again. And it's marked by a season marker, and that overall assessment is the final assessment. When it comes to day 3, they also use the borderline model. So what happens is everybody's day 3 responses are marked once. Then they put together the overall performance to determine, did the candidate pass level 1, 2, 3, and 4? If the candidate passed level 3, which is your role specific, but they failed in other levels, then the day 3 responses are marked again. So the reason I wanted to go over this evaluation process is I wanted to make sure that you understand the robust process that's in place so that they carefully review your responses. Again, your resources that are available is the blueprint, the board's report, and the common final examination and competency reference evaluation methodology. And that is what I used when I talked about the requirements to meet for each of the levels when it came to CFE. So I've talked a lot about the expectations. For the last section, I'd like to talk about how do you prepare yourself best to write CFE, whether it's the first time or if you're a rewriter. As a result, I want to really focus on and talk about the importance of selecting the best role for you when it comes to day 2, and also to provide you some advice on how to determine what are the key areas to focus on. So first of all, I know that you've all made a decision and let your region or province know the role that you're going to write when it comes to day 2. It is early April, so it's you still have time to have a heart-to-heart conversation with yourself. Is this the best role for you? Because remember, when you're writing CFE, you want to make sure that you're at peak performance, that this is the role that you know very well. Because some of the comments from the Board of Examiner is, especially when it came to May 2024, is that more candidates don't seem to be comfortable with their chosen day 2 role. They want to highlight it's important to know that the expectations differ on the day 2 role assessment opportunities. You're being tested at the elective proficiency level. So the Board of Examiners strongly encourage candidates to select their day 2 role carefully to make sure that you consider your ability to respond to that competency area at the elective proficiency level. So ask yourself, is this a strength? Is this something, if you were enrolled in the professional education program, when you wrote the module exam, did you do well on that module exam? If you marginally passed, statistic-wise, it's been proven that candidates, it makes it very difficult for them to pass their role. So carefully consider this. Also consider, do you have experience, work experience that's going to help you when it comes to the required proficiency levels? When you're selecting, for example, for performance management, are you working in or are you planning to work in a management accounting role? For finance, are you working in or planning to pursue a career where you provide investment and finance advice? For insurance, do you have experience in insurance? Or, and are you wanting to pursue that area further because you want to work with assurance engagements and internal audit? For tax, do you have experience in that area? So again, carefully consider your role. It's not too late right now, but if you're thinking that you should switch your role, you need to reach out to your province or area right away. For those of you who are rewriters, there's some valuable information that you have that can help you focus and help you identify the areas that you should focus on. So for day one, you were given an automated feedback report. Carefully review that report, identify your deficiencies, and create an action plan that addresses these areas. For example, for your situational analysis, did you meet the integration requirements? When it came to analyzing the major issues, did you lack a valuable quantitative analysis? And or did you have difficulty meeting the breadth and depth requirements for your qualitative analysis? When it came to your conclusion and your overall recommendations, did you not sufficiently address the critical strategic concerns? So again, those overarching issues, the ability for the company to, you know, work within those production or supply constraints, the ability for the company to achieve their objectives. Did you carefully consider the available capital? Did you address and talk about the strategic interrelationship between the options? There's all kinds of valuable information that you can extract from that day one automated feedback. For day 2 and 3, you would have achieved one sheet that actually shows your performance against each of the levels. And even with this information, there's some valuable insights that you can extract from it. So let me just show you just a sample. So for level 1, this candidate did not meet level 1, the sufficiency. And this is where most of the candidates struggle. So that the candidate failed that particular level. Sometimes you will get a decile rating. In this instance, the decile rating is 5, which means that 40% of the candidates performed stronger when it came to level 1. So for level 2, the candidate passed. They met the depth requirement in management accounting, but not in financial reporting. Remember, level 2, it's either financial reporting or management accounting. Level 3, they passed the role. So again, meeting that undisclosed competent responses. Level 4, they met breadth across all of the 6 technical. So that's reaching an undisclosed amount of, achieving an undisclosed amount of assessment opportunities that are rated reaching competent or higher. So when I look at this, I notice when it comes to breadth for management accounting, for breadth for financial reporting, they passed in level 4. So they met the expectations when it came to reaching competent. However, they didn't meet the depth when it came to competent responses. And remember, we know, we're not sure the exact point value, but we know more points are given to responses that are competent versus reaching competent when it comes to meeting level 1. So an important takeaway here is when preparing, I would strongly advise that you spend time on increasing your proficiency when it comes to your financial reporting issues. So I want to again share some information from the Board of Examiners report for the recent last two reports, so September 2023 and May 2024. Again, this is information from their report, but it is for illustration purposes only. I'm not in any way saying that this is the breakdown for the May 2025 CFE. But let's look at the number of assessment opportunities. There were 31 in total. There were 7 for the role, 6 for financial reporting and management accounting, 6 each, and then 3 for strategy and governance, audit and assurance, finance, and tax. So when I look at that from purely a number perspective, and I'm thinking about the different levels, it's very important that I'm comfortable in my role. And even though from a depth perspective to pass level 2, I only need to meet an undisclosed number of competent responses when it comes to management, accounting, or financial reporting. There's a lot of those assessment opportunities on both ends. So I would make sure that I'm very comfortable in all 3 areas. Now, I'm not saying in any way not to pay attention to the others, but it is extremely important that when you're sourcing and you're creating your sortable competency map using the Excel tool that I shared in the stress management webinar, make sure that you go through those very closely. Start with proficiency level A, then B, then C for your role for financial reporting and management accounting. Because the Board of Examiners are noting that there's a trend of declining technical abilities and that candidates are generally avoiding the more complex topics, and they tend to struggle with the topics that haven't been previously tested on the CFE, even though they're clearly indicated as a testable item in the competency map. So just because it hasn't been tested in a capstone 2 case, or just because it hasn't been tested on a CFE exam, does not mean it's not going to be tested on this upcoming exam. Remember, the competency map is your syllabus. If it's identified as a testable skill, it could be there. There's only so many hours in the day, so spend your time and energy starting with competency level, proficiency level A, then B, then C. So they're reminding candidates that expect a variety of issues with varying difficulty. Make sure that you have sufficient level of technical knowledge across all of the competency areas. Also, make sure that you're familiar with the reference schedule. They provide you with a reference schedule in the exam. So make sure that you're familiar with what information is on there and use it when appropriate. So again, your best source of information to help you from a technical perspective is the competency map. Make sure that you review the Managing Stress webinar because you want to create a sortable file for your role, financial reporting, and management accounting. So before I open the floor for any questions you'll have, I want to stress that stress management, the recording is available. The recording for this webinar will be available shortly. So in the next few days, it will be posted. Registration is open for day 1. So if you're doing the Viviana case, I will be doing a webinar on April 7th for Neptune. on April the 8th. So you only need to attend the webinar based on the day one case that you're going to write. Day two in the path to competent is the week after, and that's on April the 14th. Day three in time management, that's on April the 16th. So registration and recordings are available in D2L, and you can find it under Introduction to Capstone 2 and CFE or the Capstone 2 homepage. So at this point, I'd like to open the floor for any questions that you have.
All right. No, thank you, Debbie. And just to let everybody know, so we'll go about approximately 15 minutes for Q&A, but for all questions, please use the Q&A function within the Teams profile there. We won't be taking any questions in terms of asking candidates directly over the voice part, but we'll try to navigate as many as we can through the Q&A platform there. So on the first question that's come in there, Debbie, and I think this will be related to day one, but I know you'll cover this more in next week's webinars, but I think candidates are thinking about this. So I think it's just an important one to bring up there. But the question came up here is for the SWOT analysis points for day one. The candidates were asking, should they just state the facts or should they also be utilizing the so what at the end of the case facts there? And then also to add on there, Debbie, the question was, what was the importance of the situational analysis framework? As it looks like there's some confusion on whether you can get marks for it or not. There.
No problem. So first and foremost, in any case, so anytime you're doing a SWOT analysis, a PESTEL analysis, a pro-con analysis, or advantages, disadvantages, risks, opportunities, whatever categories you want to use, simply stating the case facts is not enough. You're just regurgitating what they've given you. You must always answer that question, so what? What is the potential positive or negative impact to the company? So if you identify a strength in your situational analysis, you must not only state the case fact, but discuss the why and the impact. You must always do that. So a situational analysis, let's go back a moment. And again, please attend the day one presentation next week. So you are being tested on, do you understand and have you considered the internal and external environment in which the company operates? The only way that you can, first of all, show that you know what the internal and external environment is if you create a situational analysis. That in isolation is not worth points, or it's you simply conducted your analysis, but you need to integrate. So take those relevant facts and apply them to your analysis of that strategic option. That is what we call integration. That says this is what's happening internally and externally. This option, if you implement it, it will capitalize on this opportunity, which will increase your revenue. When you create your situational analysis and you take factors from that and include it into your analysis of the required, that is what counts. That is what you must do to pass day one. That's a key component of passing day one.
Perfect. No, thanks there, Debbie. Yeah, so as Debbie mentioned, next week, Debbie go through some examples here just to outline specifically for the Viviana's case and as well as for Neptune Point Fisheries case in terms of like, oh, okay, how can you apply the situational analysis framework and then utilize it in your answer? So the key thing we want to emphasize is you're not doing it because it's for the sake of doing it. You're actually going to be utilizing it going forward there. So thank you, Debbie, for helping to expand upon that. Another question that's come in, and this is a common question that's asked. So I thought it's a great question in terms of just to ask you here. So let's say if you want to reference any standard, so often it's financial reporting. One comes into mind there. When indicating the section in ASPE or IFRS, do you have to indicate the paragraph number as well in the section? So, like, how detailed do you need to be when you
Okay.
do your analysis there?
Yes, I love this question. So, first and foremost, the best advice that I can give you is if you are going to paraphrase the criteria, so say as per ASPE, revenue recognition is and paraphrase the criteria in your own words, you just need to say as per ASPE or as per IFRS. If you're paraphrasing the criteria in your own words. If you start copying and pasting information from the handbook, then you need to reference, ASPE 3400 and the paragraph. What happens is there's limited time. So I love the flashcards that they provide. Go over the criteria. So in most instances, you will be comfortable enough to paraphrase. And then if you need to go into the handbook to copy, and you're only going to copy the section that you need, then you will have to reference that section exactly. But if you're paraphrasing, no, you do not need to.
All right, perfect. No, thank you, Debbie, for that. And that's one thing as you guys go through Capstone 2 or just practicing cases, you'll kind of get a general idea of like, oh, okay, how much more in detail you guys need to go there. But the other thing to keep in mind is remember your audience. So communication is a big thing. So sometimes if you provide too technical of an answer to someone who's potentially maybe not as familiar with accounting standards, that will also come into account too. So, i.e., the communication part there. Another question's come in. It's related to day one, but I know Debbie will answer this more next in next week's webinar. Is are strategic proposals mutually exclusive on day one?
Oh, so what you do is when you analyze each of the strategic options, okay, you're going to perform both a quantitative and qualitative analysis and provide a recommendation based on that analysis. You might find, say, there's 4 strategic options. Be on the lookout. There might be 5, which means you need to manage your time differently. There could be 5. Maybe they're all viable options. But when you provide your overall recommendation, you have to sit back and think. There's only so much. Maybe they only have 2.5 million to spend. So therefore, even though they're all viable options, you can only implement 1 or 2 or 3 choices. So then you need to prioritize and explain why you would implement one option over another. Sometimes the option is if you recommend one option, that means you can't do another option. For example, last weekend when we looked at the module workshop, and I'm going to do this exact case next week with everyone, is that if you use the facility for one thing, you couldn't use it for another. So again, when you're providing your overall recommendation, you have to provide a sound rationale behind why you're doing one over another. And more likely than not, even if they're all viable, you probably aren't able to implement them all.
All right, perfect. No, thanks there, Debbie. And I see a lot of questions are coming in. We'll try to answer as many as we can. I've got colleagues that are there looking at certain questions that have come in. We do apologize if we're not able to address your question there, but we'll do the best as we can. in regards to that. And I know we only got a couple minutes left here. So, Debbie, I'll give you a couple more questions in terms of come in, and then we'll conclude the webinar at half past here. So, one of the questions that's come in, and I think it's a good question because candidates are trying to figure out a little bit of the passing profile and what do we need to do in regards to it. So, the questions come in where the difference between competent rating and then reaching competent. So the question is that certain candidates are thinking, do they only need to focus on getting competent ratings in financial reporting and management accounting and just get reaching on the others there? So I know you talked a bit about the level 1, 2, 3, and 4 profiles for days 2 and 3, but I wonder if you can expand upon that in
Sure.
regards to that question there.
Sure. So let's talk about, I always kind of think of things in the context of fundamental principles. So first and foremost, time management is critical. You need to complete all of the assessment opportunities to the best of your ability within the time frame that you have. The goal is to complete them and to achieve as many competent responses as you can across all of the technical skills because if it's competent, we know that that's going to have the most positive impact when it comes to level 1. If your response is competent, we know that that's going to have a positive impact when it comes to level 2 for financial reporting and management accounting, and level 3 for your role. So the biggest area that candidates find challenging, and where more often than not, when they fail day 2 and 3, it's around that level 1. And level 1, we know more points are awarded for competent responses. So the strategy, again, is to achieve as many competent responses as you can. That will increase your chances of passing every level.
Yeah, no, exactly. And just to add on to what Debbie's mentioned here, and I think Debbie will agree with me, if you see an AO, try to address it. Like, don't leave any AOs on the table, as we like to say there.
Yeah,
So, what you're gonna find in the next couple months here, and this is the hardest thing to do, is that you're gonna want to write so much on a particular area because you're like, that's what I need to get to a competent level. What you're gonna be doing is basically practicing these cases and assessing, like, oh, okay, this is the amount of detail that we need to get to that competent rating and move on and move on and move on. So in the beginning here, it will take a bit of time for you guys to figure this out here, but you will improve upon this. And don't worry if the marks that you get in terms of capstone 2 cases aren't what you think it's going to be. You guys will get there. Practice makes perfect.
you got it.
In regards to there. So I
Great
know
advice.
we're reaching the end here in regards to the webinar session. So Debbie, yeah, that will conclude in terms of the Q&A portion of the event. So again, we apologize if we weren't able to get to your question, but I know my colleagues in the background are answering them as we speak right now. Just a couple of logistics things to let you guys know. So tonight's webinar is being recorded. So as Debbie mentioned, so we'll get the recording link out there. If you give us a couple of days, in regards to 1 to 2 days, just for logistics point of view, the stress management webinar link is available, and each of the regions have posted the link to the site in the Capstone 2 and in the Introduction to Capstone 2 module. So just to let you guys know there. And though for those who are writing day 1 of the exam there, next week's webinar with Debbie,
Yes.
um, great resource. We'll probably even go for longer than what we've
No.
gone for today. So it's a pretty in-depth webinar. So we highly encourage you to register for it and listen in regards to that there. So on behalf of CPA Western School of Business, CPA Ontario, and CPA Atlantic, thank you, Debbie, for
Welcome.
tonight's webinar presentation. And thanks to each and all of you to
Mm.
joining tonight's session. Have a great evening wherever you are, and we will join you guys, hopefully, and see you guys next week. So have a great night.